Hey everyone, Matt here from On Running, and today we're going to do a full review of the On Cloudmonster 2. So this is On's higher cushioned daily training shoe. The last version really did well. It was kind of one of the first shoes that we on Dr. Running felt like was an actually cushioned On shoe. Now, to be fair, it's still a little on the firmer end, and there is now a more cushioned version called the On Cloud Eclipse, which we'll have a video comparison of that fairly soon. But this is version 2, and there's a lot of changes that still keep the essence of this shoe while really finessing a couple things and making something else a little bit different. So let's talk about that stuff. First, talk about specs. There is a higher stack height in this version now. It's 35 millimeters in the heel, 29 in the forefoot for a 6 millimeter drop. That's up a couple millimeters from the previous version. It is still fairly cushioned, but fairly on the firmer end for how much foam there is there. It's not bare bones, but there's a lot more resiliency than compliance, meaning the sole does bounce, but it's not super soft. It's just got good protective cushioning while still being a little bit on the firmer end. There are two different densities of midsole here. I believe it's both Helion foam. The forefoot foam now has a slightly softer feel. The heel is slightly firmer. And what that does is it makes the heel not bottom out. As somebody who's a heel striker, in the first version when I landed, it felt like this was a negative drop shoe. And I actually had some Achilles issues in version 1. I still liked it, but it was just kind of difficult for me to run more mileage in when I wasn't really prepping my Achilles. This version, the way they've set that up, really solves that, where it's still this really nice rockered ride, but it's more balanced now, so it doesn't feel like the heel gives way. When you land, it transitions you nicely forward, and then you've got this softer foam, which compresses a little bit more, which kind of evens it out instead of the heel bottoming it out. So really nice in that regard. Despite there not being a massive bevel on this shoe, it still has a really solid heel transition, and I think that's because the clouds are actually doing a great job of compressing now. Again, not a super soft ride, but one that's definitely a little bit responsive that I was really surprised out. The forefoot, though, this shoe is a teeny bit stiff, not the stiffest, but there is a speed board in here that's now hidden as they fill this in, which actually adds some rigidity to the sole and makes it inherently more stable, to be honest with you, compared to the last version where I felt like separated a little bit. But back to forefoot flexibility, it's on the stiffer side, and there's a good rocker that transitions you forward really nicely. Not too much toe spring here, just a little bit, so people that want their foot in a relatively neutral position, their toes, you should be fine here. But the ride is actually fairly nice and responsive, despite the fact the weight has gone up. So men's size 9 is now coming in at 10.4 ounces, women's size 8 is coming in at 8.1 ounces, so it's a little bit heavier than the last version, but I actually didn't have a problem with that because the foam is actually really, especially the clouds are actually really nice and responsive. With her, I actually ran a 5:39 stroller mile, and the last mile of a 14-mile long run actually did really well. Is this a racing shoe? No, that's not how it's intended, but it can still move if you push it. So the weight I'm not as worried about based on the fact it is a fairly responsive sole if that's something that you want, which is really great. The uppers where things really changed. So the last version felt very normal, maybe slightly wider. This version is wide and much higher volume, which is great because there's plenty of room. If you have a wider or a higher volume foot, this might work really well. The only challenge to that for my foot, which is kind of more normal volume, I really had to lock the laces down, and unfortunately the tongue is extremely thin. So I started irritating the dorsum of my foot or the top of my foot, and some of you may have felt this before, where all of a sudden the top of your foot starts to really hurt and it's kind of achy, and sometimes that can happen because you've tied the laces too tight and you're really compressing all your toe extensor tendons. So that's what I got because I was just trying to lock this shoe down, and unfortunately there's not enough protection here. So if you're gonna wear this shoe, I would suggest either A, if you have a higher volume foot, you should be okay, or B, you're gonna need to wear some thicker socks to take up some of the volume as well as provide some protection for you. There are some very interesting ways to modify this. There's variations of lacing techniques where you can actually, instead of crossing it, can actually just come straight across and go up like this. I'll have to share a video, but look at Lydiard lacing. There's other forms of lacing you can use to take some pressure off your foot in that way. But overall, I think this shoe is great. I like it better than the previous version, especially the way the sole is set up, so I don't feel my Achilles getting loaded as much, but it's still in that same regard in terms of a training shoe that can pick up the pace, that's classic to On, that's just a little bit more firm and responsive. So that's something you're looking for. That's great. If you want something a little bit more relaxed, the On Cloud Eclipse is probably a better option for you, but in classic On style, it's also a little bit firm. Hope this video helped you decide whether this shoe is right for you or not. We'll have more soon, so check back in with us.